Metallica, untouchable heavy metal kings. They've ruled the stage for more than 4 decades, sold over 163 million albums globally, and shaped thrash for decades. But what the public doesn't know is this: not all bands have basked in their glory. Behind great tours and iconic performances are tales of rejection, rivalry, and plain bad matches. Today, we're breaking down the top 10 bands Metallica refused to tour with, and why. From punk icons to glam giants and even bitter rivals, some of these reasons will shock you. Stick around, this list is wild. Number 10. Slipknot. Few bands in the modern era embody chaos, intensity, and theatrical aggression quite like Slipknot. Since their self-titled debut in 1999, they've been one of the most explosive live acts in the world. 9 masked members tearing across the stage, pounding on drums, climbing scaffolding, and unleashing songs like Wait and Bleed and Duality. With Metallica being the biggest metal band on the planet, you'd think a joint tour between the two would be a no-brainer. But here's the twist: it's never happened. So why not? The reason is down to intensity, control, and ego. First, the live gig contrast. Slipknot gigs are sheer bedlam, intentionally disordered, unpredictable, and in danger of overwhelming the senses. Pyro, jumpsuits, masks, and 9 performers unleashing a maelstrom of noise and energy. Metallica's gigs, although still intense, are the opposite: methodically constructed, disciplined, and precise. Their aim is to produce a tight, professional show. Touring together could have been a conflict of philosophies: Metallica's precision versus Slipknot's unbridled chaos. There's also the crowd dynamic. Slipknot's crowd is younger and hungrier for extremity. Mosh pits, walls of death, and constant carnage are the order of their shows. Metallica's crowd, though still ravenous for heavy music, cuts across generations, from old-school thrashers to parents introducing their children. Blending those crowds could have been volatile, with one side requiring intensity and the other legacy-based anthems, such as Nothing Else Matters. There is the matter of headliner pride to consider, which cannot be ignored. Both bands are headliner material, Slipknot and Metallica. Neither would open for the other, and that raises all sorts of difficult questions. Who closes, who takes longer set, and who actually attracts the most fans? And indeed, for Metallica, fierce defenders of their number 1 position, even the possibility of sharing that spotlight with Slipknot was too perilous. It shouldn't be mentioned that there are bad vibes involved. Actually, Slipknot singer Corey Taylor has praised Metallica multiple times as being among his greatest influences. But even Taylor once confessed in an interview in 2019 that the two bands are worlds apart when it comes to how they perform live. The Metallica-Slipknot tour would still be one of the most epic what-ifs in contemporary metal. No doubt it would have been epic, lightly tossing huge tempers about the premises. But one thing Metallica did was tour with safer bands, Pantera or Five Finger Death Punch, as far from untouchable sludge horror that just couldn't give the band anything it really desired. Metallica would have risked insane measures under acceptance. So, the so-called dream never went beyond the drawing board. If you thought that was crazy, just wait until you see who's next. Number 9. Creed. Okay, say what you want about them, but Creed were enormous at their zenith. Their album Human Clay sold a whopping 20 million copies worldwide, with radio-conquering hits such as Higher and With Arms Wide Open. By the time their second album, Weathered, arrived, they were touring arenas and festivals as headliners, established as one of America's largest bands. So why on earth did Metallica never tour with Creed? Really, it comes down to musical philosophy, imagery, and fan mismatch. Let's begin with the music itself. Creed went deep into post-grunge bread and butter, soaring anthemic ballads, spiritual themes, and Scott Stapp's operatic vocal style. Their music was usually thought to be Christian-oriented anthems, although the band was not officially promoted that way. Metallica, however, established its legacy through aggression, introspection, and a pessimistic outlook. Combining them together would have been like tonal mismatch. One band encouraging people to turn towards the light, while the other venturing into the darkness of human strife. Next came the credibility image problem. In the late 90s, Metallica were experimenting with their sound and brought out Load in '96 and Reload in '97, which were quite tepid reactions. They shaved off their hair, changed the logo, and ventured into more alternative sounds and music. At this point, Metallica was in worse trouble for doubting their credibility, and people were voicing that they had softened. Given that Creed is such a commercial band that critics and metalheads alike tend to sneer at, Metallica did not necessarily need this ironic tour. There was once when Lars Ulrich himself would sneer at bands that compromised their image for radio palatability. To Metallica, Creed likely represented exactly the type of safe mainstream rock they were going out of their way to avoid. And what about fans? Creed's fan base was radio-oriented, younger, and consisted of more casual rock fans. Metallica's fan base were diehards, metalheads who lived for circle pits and headbanging. Blending the two would have been spectacular. Can you picture Creed fans going through the motions, swaying to with arms wide open before Metallica descended upon them with battery? Not gonna fly. Metallica opted instead with tour companions that would be able to maintain their heavy bona fides. Corrosion of Conformity, perhaps Pantera. Creed simply wouldn't fit into the niche, regardless of their chart success. Not a lot of open feud, not a lot of public dissing, merely a subdued, deliberate decision. Metallica would be saving their reputation without risking what could very easily have turned into one of the most unequal tours of the decade. Number 8. The Offspring. On paper, a tour featuring them alongside Metallica during the mid-1990s sounds like a recipe for success. But in practice, it didn't happen. And why it didn't happen is to tell us a lot about where Metallica's head was at that decade. Let's rewind to the mid-90s. Metallica had just come off the massive success of the Black Album. Songs like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters had propelled them beyond the world of thrash into full-blown mainstream rock superstardom. They were filling stadiums, redefining their sound, and appealing to millions of new fans who had never touched a Slayer or Exodus record in their lives. While that was going on, The Offspring were riding high on their breakthrough album Smash, an album that was reinvigorating punk rock into the mainstream with singles like Come Out and Play and Self-Esteem. They were no longer a cult band. They were spearheading a full-fledged punk revival. Both bands were huge, but in hugely different ways. So why did it not work? According to frontman Dexter Holland, Metallica's camp turned down an offer to tour with them during that era. And it all came down to, you guessed it, musical direction. Metallica was deliberately leaning into a heavier, serious image at the time. Their brand was built around epic riffs, dark lyrics, and a reputation for being uncompromising. The Offspring, for their part, had a tongue-in-cheek, sardonic thread that ran through their sound. Tracks like Pretty Fly for a White Guy later on only served to heighten that carefree image. Evidently, drummer Lars Ulrich considered the Offspring's skate punk vibe as incompatible to some extent with the Metallica sound. Could you imagine Metallica enthusiasts turning up for an evening of crushing heaviness to discover Dexter Holland cracking jokes between turbocharged punk anthems? It would have been water and oil. There were also practical considerations. By the mid-90s, Metallica was packing out the football stadiums. The Offspring, although very successful, were still playing a lot of headlining theater and arena dates. The whole logistics of raking them in over an opening slot might have fell off. And then, let's be honest, Metallica fans in the pit back then most likely would have devoured The Offspring. It wasn't, though, personal. Dexter Holland would go on to comment that he admired the choice. No bad blood, no soap opera, just different universes. But fans want to know what they would have witnessed in a Metallica Offspring crossover tour. A bridge from thrash to punk across generations? Or a half-appreciative crowd and half-crowd of hooligans? Either way, what a compelling what-if from the heyday of 90s rock. Number 7. Limp Bizkit. Adore them or abhor them, you can't help but acknowledge that at their height, they were huge. With Fred Durst strutting about in his red Yankees hat and tracksuits, the group spearheaded the nu metal explosion along with Korn, Linkin Park, and Slipknot. Singles like Break Stuff, Rollin', and Nookie weren't mere hits. They were anthems for an entire generation of teeny boppers with attitude. So here's the big question. Why did Metallica, one of the world's biggest live draws, ever hit the road with Limp Bizkit during that nu metal boom? After all, both bands were dominating MTV, radio, and festival lineups. On paper, you'd think the crossover could have been huge. The answer boils down to three main factors: image, fans, and reliability. First up, image. Metallica's brand has long rested on grit, musicianship, and honesty. Even when they dabbled in mainstream sounds on Load and Reload, there was still something serious about them. Limp Bizkit, on the other hand, went all in on theatrics, attitude, and frat boy shtick that was all about spectacle and not substance. In a 2003 interview, James Hetfield criticized some of the new metal bands, calling them more about shock value than about art. Although he didn't mention Limp Bizkit by name, it wasn't difficult to link the dots. And then there is the fan base problem. Metallica's fan base is intensely loyal and combative, preferring their own heavy metal to the crossover rap rock shrieks of Limp Bizkit fans. More than anything, during the Saint Anger period, Metallica were in so much bad graces with the public. They'd be taking a chance by